What's going on, everyone? Max from ViVA Performance here. Today we're going to be replacing the alternator on my 2007 Volvo S60 T5. This process should be nearly identical on all the P2 Volvos, so S60, V70, S80, XC70, and XC90, so long as they have the 5-cylinder engine. To identify if your alternator needs to be replaced, one of the first things you can do is use Volvo's diagnostic tool ViVA to scan for any outlying codes. The codes will be preceded by ECM, which stands for Engine Control Module, the computer that will be reading these codes and will be telling you exactly what's going on. If there is any low voltage codes being flagged by the alternator. Your SEM, your Central Electronic Module, may also identify these codes and put a message on the DIM, the driver information module, on the dash to let you know that there is something going on. You may see it may say engine system service required. The final indicator that your alternator may be going bad is if the battery symbol on the dash illuminates. This means that the car is not seeing the proper amount of voltage being charged to the battery by the alternator. Once you have identified that your alternator is failing, ordering one is super easy. We have the Bosch 160 amp units on our site, both brand new in box and remanufactured. The Bosch unit is OE equipment, which means that it's the same quality as Volvo, but with a lower price tag. You can find the links to those down below in the description box. For tools, I had a T25 1/4-inch drive, 7mm 1/4-inch drive, 8mm 1/4-inch drive, a 1/4-inch drive ratchet, 1/4-inch drive extension, a short 10mm 3/8 drive, a long 10mm 3/8 drive, a long 13mm 3/8 drive, a 3/8 drive ratchet, 3/8 drive extension, 3/8 drive breaker bar for a smaller profile head, a T55 with 3/8 drive. This is optional, but I also used a electric ratchet. This is 1/4-inch drive. A pair of snips, and a screwdriver, which also optional. However, it can make some situations a little bit easier. Now that we have our tools, we can go ahead and disconnect power from the engine bay. You don't have to go all the way into the trunk to disconnect the battery, because Volvo put a access point in the engine bay where we can disconnect all power for the entire harness in the bay. Right here, if you flip up this cover, you'll see a 13mm nut that you can take off and then lift this power cable off, close the cover, and flop the cable back on. Now that I have the nut off, I can go ahead, lift up on this cable, flop this plastic piece back down, and now we're protected. There's no more charge going into the engine bay. Now that we've disconnected power from the engine bay, we can go ahead and remove the over-the-engine pipe. There are two T25 Torx bits that attach it to the intake manifold, and then a 7mm hose clamp that attach it to the lower intercooler hose. You can see here one of the mounting points on the intake manifold. There was a bracket on the over-the-engine pipe. Unfortunately, mine has since broken off. Here's the second, and then there's the 7mm hose clamp. So I've removed the T25 from the intake manifold and loosened the 7mm hose clamp on the end of the over-the-engine pipe. But before I go to flop it out of the way, I'm going to pull out the dipstick so that we don't break it and just set it aside. To get the most amount of space possible, you can go ahead and remove that 7mm hose clamp and unclip this wire from the back of the over-the-engine pipe to remove it from the engine bay. So that nothing unwanted falls into my turbo, I'm going to leave a rag in the place of the over-the-engine pipe. Next, we're going to remove the radiator fan. For most P2s, it's going to be as simple as moving the fresh air pipe and then possibly popping out the airbox. But on the R models and late T5 models, you're definitely going to want to remove the airbox just to give yourself a little bit more room. There will be two 8mm bolts attaching the radiator fan to the radiator, and then just zip ties attaching the connectors or the wires rather, to the fan. As you can see, it's a really tight fit between the airbox and the fan. So on my car, I'm going to remove the airbox. On a normal P2, such as an S60 or V70, XC70, any of those, your airbox is going to sit over here, so you should be fine without removing it. Now that my airbox has been removed, I threw a rag in the turbo inlet pipe so that I don't get anything unwanted into my turbo. And I have free access to cut the zip ties. They're attaching the cables to the fan. And then one fastener there, one fastener there, and she can come straight out. Now that the fan's removed, we have all kinds of room. So what we're gonna wanna do is next remove this intercooler pipe right here, this lower intercooler pipe. It's gonna be a 7mm hose clamp, just like all the other ones, right down there on the back side of the intercooler.
As these hoses age, they tend to crack or split. So if you want to replace them with a more heavy-duty option, such as silicone, we have D088 options on our site, which you can find in the description box below.
Our next step will be to drain the coolant from the radiator. You can find the radiator drain plug down here on the driver's side. We're going to jack the car up, put it on jack stands, and drain the coolant. When jacking a car up, please remember to never get under a car that's only supported by a jack. Be sure to use proper jack stands to support the car. As you can see here, the coolant is draining after just cracking through the drain plug. It is plastic, so don't go too crazy with it, and it does not need to be fully removed either. After cracking the drain plug free, you're going to notice it won't really drain out too much. You're going to have to crack open the coolant bottle so you can let air into the system and let it fully drain. Now that the coolant has drained from the system, we can go ahead and remove the upper radiator hose, which is held on by a 7mm hose clamp at the top of the radiator neck. If you have the tool to do this, you can actually go ahead and remove the ECM and TCM from this box right here. It'll give you a bit more space, but otherwise you can just go ahead and unclip the power steering hose from right here and then flip the assembly over the engine like so. Now we'll grab our T55 and 3/8 ratchet to remove the tension on the accessory belt. Once I've removed the 3 bolts on the power steering pump, I'm going to push the upper radiator hose under the power steering hose and then just move the power steering pump out of the way. Once that's out of the way, all that's left is to actually just unbolt the alternator and the electrical connections that are on it. So all that needs to be removed is this pigtail here, and then under this cap is a 13mm nut that we can just take right off that attaches the power cable to the alternator. With the cap removed, you can see that nut right there. Once the nut has been removed, it will just slide right off. Now that the electrical connections have been removed, we can go ahead and start removing the bolts. So I've already started removing the bolts, so it's a bit more obvious which ones they are. This one here on the side, this one here on the bottom, as well as this one. And then you want to loosen but not take out the 2 lower AC compressor bolts. Now that we have our old alternator out, the new one can go back in. Getting the old alternator out isn't too big of a deal, and getting the new one back in also isn't too big of a deal. However, you may need to get creative in the way or shape that you pull the alternator out with. It is a tight fit, especially with the big end of the intake manifold, and then just kind of everything in that area, including the accessory bracket. Installation is going to be the reverse of install. Get that top bolt started, those bottom 2 bolts started, and once those are started, you can begin to tighten up the AC compressor bolts. Now that the belt's installed, you can see that process a little bit more clearly. So it comes down around the tensioner, around the crank, up to the alternator, down to the AC compressor, and all the way back up again to the power steering pump. Now we can put our power steering reservoir back into place. So we've just about wrapped up, and I just started filling the coolant. But when you go to tighten the drain plug on the radiator, be sure to be careful as it is plastic. So I just finished buttoning everything up, but I have to let the coolant burp, so I'm going to start up the car, let it run for a little bit, wait for the coolant level to drop, and then refill it. So as you can see, the car is now running. All I'm waiting for is the coolant to burp out. There is some air still left in the system, so I'm just waiting for that, and otherwise should be good to go. And just like that, we have a clear dash. I hope you guys enjoyed this video on how to replace an alternator. If you'd like to see more of this, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment down below on what you'd like to see us DIY next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.